Good afternoon. It's Sandra. It's the top of the hour, so I'm going to get started today. Hopefully, you guys are going to have a better day or better weather day than I'm having, so I can get you in and out fairly quickly. So, first of all, if you're here today and this is brand new for you, you don't know what it is I've been doing an anti aging series from A to Z. Now, I'm still in the A and B sections, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about having strong abdominals and how to really look about 10 pounds lighter without having to do any sit ups. Promise. Okay. So, to give you a little background, I've been a holistic health coach, transformation coach, and mindset coach for over 35 years. But for 25 of those years, I was actually a personal trainer and a group exercise instructor. I'm certified in over 15, maybe even more modalities. I have two Pilates certifications, a yoga certification, and I think I'm certified in just about most all forms of exercise circa 2015, except for Zumba, which I was moving to Florida when Zumba first came out and became really popular. So I just didn't have time to get certified. But other than that, I was, I was exercising with Jane Fonda in the 80s. So it's been that long. And believe me, while a lot has changed in fitness, a lot remains the same. And so what I find is that as we all get older, certain parts of our body start to accumulate body fat. We find that we're not as strong as we used to be, and we certainly aren't shaped like we used to be. So what I wanted to do with this was I'm going to make this a fairly short presentation because I'm going to give you two short videos that are going to show you just about everything I'm going to talk about today. But first, I want to explain why I'm so really passionate about this type of functional exercise over just, sit-ups, and why they don't really work and why you shouldn't be doing them. I'm someone who has had a history of postural deficits. So my spine isn't the way a person's spine should be. I'm very curved at the top and I sort of tilt under at the bottom, and that causes its own set of problems. And after I'd lost a whole bunch of weight in the early, in the mid 80s, I lost about 88 pounds. And I proceeded to take on a career in physical fitness. But even after working out for 10 or 15 years, I still had a bigger stomach than I had a behind. I was backwards for some reason. And so I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I was teaching 3 or 4 classes every single day, and I had multiple sit ups in those classes. But my abdominals weren't really changing, and my body was getting very short, compacted, and boxy until about 1999 when I became a Pilates instructor. And it was through learning Pilates that I realized the impact of imbalances of muscles on how we look and feel. So that's where this all sort of begins. So with that Pilates background, I learned a lot of things about what they call posture and plumb line, what it takes to have a body that functions well, that's resilient, and yes, flattens abs. Within about a month or so after I was certified and I started teaching in the gym I was working at, I had so many people, and most of them were my colleagues. They were trainers that came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, what have you been doing? You look amazing. How much weight have you lost?" And I hadn't lost a pound. And I thought, what is the difference between what people are seeing now and what people saw before? I mean, I didn't do anything different. So, sorry, didn't realize my phone was on. So anyway, I realized that the difference was in order for me to be a good Pilates instructor and to demonstrate effectively, I had to make sure I wasn't doing a lot of the muscle building activity that I had been doing prior to certification. Because in Pilates, there's a lot of hands behind your body to hold yourself up. And I actually couldn't put my hands behind my body. I was very tight here because I'm very rounded here. So before we start, I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to bring in something that's affecting people more and more today, especially in the last year, since people have been sitting home and doing this all day long, or more than they used to do. So there is something that a lot of people are calling text neck. And that's where the head is down all day. So you've got this accentuated curvature in your upper spine from looking down at the screen. And the other thing that will pose a problem with that posture and position is that your body is rounded forward when we're texting, and it lengthens these muscles and it tightens these muscles. That goes all the way down the chain. That will affect your posture all the way down to your ankles, because your body is literally a set of things that balance atop one another. So today, since we are still in the A's of my Becoming Timeless series, I promised I would talk about exercise. I figured since it had to do with A, I would bring it up today about the no sit-up way to get strong abdominals. So again, the presentation is not long, but I will be providing you 2 videos in with this. If you are currently in my course that is free, those will also be posted there, but if you need them, I will post them down below. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment, and I'm going to pull up this little presentation here. And then I will take any questions if you have them. So I call this the no sit-up way to flatter abs, because what you see this girl doing here is actually not the best way to work your abdominals. And the reason for that is going to be very apparent as I go through the presentation. But when I was first in fitness school, and oh goodness, was it 19? It was a long time ago. I think I was 19. I was probably 21. Way back then, we used to have tests for levels of fitness, and a sit-up test was a test. How many sit-ups can you do in a minute? And I was pride myself on the fact that I could do a whole hell of a lot after a while. But with my little poochy stomach 10 or 15 years later, I had to wonder, am I missing something? What am I missing? So my big message today is going to be, you can actually get a flatter stomach, a stronger back, a more balanced upper body and lower body, and you don't have to do not one sit-up. So let me describe a little bit about the functions of the abdominals and how they work, and that's going to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so what does your abs do? Well, there are muscles that are involved in torso flexion, which is forward. And then if I go back a little bit, I'm actually stretching my abdominals and I'm extending, so that they are part of the flexion extension sets of muscles, your front and your back, right? Torso rotation, side bending, and then what they call cross crawl action. Think of a baby on all fours, right? That motion of one hand and knee contralateral in front of the other, right? Your back functions are, again, torso extension, torso rotation, and side bending. So you can see that these muscles work together very, very much. But so many people separate them. I have seen people do a million crunches and they never do anything to balance that out. And then you get older, if you're exercising 15 or 20 years, you start hunching over. And there's a reason for that, because the more you work one side in this example, the more you crunch, the tighter your obliques and all of the muscles in your torso are going to be, including the fronts of your shoulders. But when you tense a muscle on one side, you're lengthening a muscle. So if one muscle side contracts, the other one is expanding, the other one is stretching, and you can create an imbalance in your upper body that will actually give you a pooch. And so some of the exercises that people do wrong, we're going to correct that today so you can start doing things right and really get some good results in a very short period of time. Like I said, 2 weeks, and I had people noticing how different I looked. So first I want to talk about position. Take a look at a sit-up, right? The one I showed you where the feet are on the floor, the hands are behind the head, right? That person's feet are on the floor. But think about being a baby. Does a baby ever put their feet on the floor? Not until they get a little bit older. This position, when you're lying on your back, your knee is over your hip, your feet are off the floor, is called open chain. And that is how a baby strengthens their abdominals, by moving and kicking and all of that stuff, but their feet never touch the floor, right? Like this. This is called closed chain. And when people work their abdominals like this, they're working them in an unnatural position and actually an unsafe position. And I'm going to show you why. So after your baby gets a little bit older, what happens? They realize that they've got a little bit of strength and stability and they roll over. And we know that as tummy time, right? Tummy time is a big thing because you need to balance the front and the back. So the main message here is you don't work the abs without working the back as well. Very, very important. So this is how we all started. We worked all the muscles all the way around our abdominal section. So what do I actually mean by that? I'm going to start with the deepest layer and the most important layer for the strength and resilience of your joints and the flattening of your abs. Okay. And then we're going to move to the muscles that are more superficial on the outside. So a little anatomy here. Now, this is a terrible picture, but I couldn't really find too many good ones. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This muscle is called the transverse abdominis, or the TA for short. Now, this muscle attaches to the base of your ribs, the iliac spine, which is the curve of your hip bone. You can see it in green, and it goes all the way into your pelvis. So it literally attaches from the ribs to the pelvis in front and in back. Now you can't see this in this picture very well, but your transverse abdominis actually does attach to the back part of your hip and the back of your spine. So think about this as a cylinder, and it's kind of like your body's natural girdle. And that's why conventional sit-ups don't work, because they don't really get at this. And I'm going to be showing you why. So this is a little bit foggy here. You might not be able to see it, but the functions of your transverse ab, this just tells you insertion and origin mean where does it begin and where does it end. And it basically begins in the costrosternal aponeurosis, which is just a white cartilage under your ribs. All right. No need to worry about the terminology. The action of it compresses your ribs and viscera, your organs, right? Providing thoracic, which is your chest, and pelvic stability. It also innervates or has nerve endings in your rib cage, right? So this is like a big cylinder that wraps around your body, and the stronger it is, the stronger you'll be, and the flatter your abs will be. Now, there's reasons I'm going to get to why people have difficulty with poochy bellies, even if they're doing other exercises, but that's going to come a little bit later. So I just want you to notice this. Now, if you have a second and you want to do this, I can kind of show you how your abs really work. It's more simple than you think. So if you take your hands and you place them on your rib cage, and you cough, you can see, or when you're throwing up, if you've ever coughed all night or thrown up all night, you wake up the next day and you just feel like somebody beat the living daylights out of you, front and back. You hurt all the way around. Those are your breathing muscles, your transverse abdominis, along with your diaphragm. These muscles move your abdominals, okay? So that's a really important point. Now you have these other muscles that are in your sides. And sometimes when you see a picture of a bodybuilding guy, you can see the definition in some of these muscles. These muscles here are called your obliques. Now there's two sets of obliques. There's an internal oblique and an external oblique. And these bilaterally compress your abdomen. If I go side to side, right? And ipsilateral trunk rotation, which literally just means on the same side, okay? So when you turn your body, these muscles come into play. The external obliques are also attached to ribs. These are over your transverse abs. So think of this as in layers. It also inserts into the rectus, which we all know, the little bumpy things that always show up in people who work their abs. But again, see, it's attached to your pelvis and it's attached into your back rib. These muscle fibers are very similar to, if you think of putting your hands in your pockets, that's the way they run, from the outside to the inside. Whereas the internal obliques run exactly the opposite, right? So again, I'm going to share that, putting your hands on your ribs, coughing, or making a loud noise, and you feel the movement of your ribs. They slide gently closer to your hips. That's the key point. They slide gently to your hips. That is the function of your abdominals. So then what's wrong with traditional sit-ups? So a traditional sit-up, first of all, is closed chain, feet on the floor. Your abs don't work like that. And they don't work like that very well. And they also get assisted by another muscle when this happens, which I'm getting to. Now, if you do this and you curve up, first of all, there's a whole lot of strain on your discs. To do this repeatedly is not a bright idea, but so many people don't realize that and they still do it. So closed chain is the first problem. Second problem is there's too much disc strain. Now, why is there too much disc strain? Because of this. Typically, when a disc bulges, and I've had bulging discs before, and if you have, you'll understand. The exercises I'm going to be showing you, there are some that I'm going to even show you that you can and should do with bulging discs. And they will help those discs reabsorb, if that's a possibility. Sometimes they're too far gone. But so in this position where you're curling up, you're forcing your discs to bulge sideways. Now, discs typically don't bulge to the back. They bulge to the front or sideways. And that's usually sideways is where they impinge upon a nerve root. So I told you that I was going to tell you about another muscle that's actually working a little bit harder than your abs with this exercise. But first, I want to show you the anatomy. So this is all deep to what I've already shown you. This muscle here that attaches here at the base of your back ribs. Now note the positioning of this muscle. This is super, super, super important to understand. This psoas muscle, or hip flexor, as we like to call it, it's your psoas. It attaches in your low back. It comes through the front of your pelvis, through your hip joints, and if you see, it's attaching into the insides of your hip bones. So this is something that attaches something in your back to something in your front. If this muscle is tight, you will never get flat abs. You won't be able to. I can help you get around that, but until you resolve a tightness problem, you can't effectively work and strengthen and flatten your abs. So let me go back to this position one more time. Let's put this in perspective. So if I'm looking at this person, if you're lying flat and your feet are on the ground and you're in a closed chain position, and now you curl off the floor, only the first 30 degrees of that curl is abs. From about 30 degrees upward, now your hip flexors kick in. And I can sort of help you understand this. You may have had this happen to you. Have you ever tried to do a sit-up and your feet come right up off the floor? Tight hip flexors. Your hip flexor kicks in because your abs no longer work after approximately 30 degrees. That hip flexor kicks in, but if it's tight, you are not going to be able to get up without assistance, like somebody holding your feet, which is not a good idea. We're going to talk about that specifically because of the hip flexor. So how do you test that? How do you know if that hip flexor is tight? If you have an accentuated curve in your low back and your belly kind of dips down a little bit instead of being pulled in, you might have a tight hip flexor. If you get pain in your low back or pain in your hips, you might have a tight hip flexor. And two tests that you can do to check this out. One of them is to lie flat on your back, hands and feet straight out, flat on your back. Take a breath and exhale. Don't use your hands to push, but exhale up. And if you cannot get up or if your feet lift from the floor, this muscle is tight. The other way you can tell is you can kneel on your knees. So just kneeling. And if you feel the tightness in your thigh, in your hip flexor area, then your hip flexor is tight. We call this the two joint hip flexor because it attaches to two joints, your back and your hip. So what happens in this situation, aside from, a little alone time with the spouse maybe, is now not only is she doing a sit-up that is challenging her back, using her hip flexor more than her abs, it's compounded by somebody holding her feet. So it's like a compound closed chain exercise. Your hip flexors, if they're stronger because you're used to using them more, those things are going to pull you right up. And you never really touched your abs. Maybe the first few abs of the rectus, but that's it. So how do you activate the transverse ab, your body's natural girdle? You remember the baby, right? 90-degree knees. So instead of putting your feet on the floor, all you need to do is bring your knees directly over your hips and your feet out at 90 degrees from the hip. You don't want to drop your feet unless it's really hard for you to do. And then that's a cheat, but you can drop your feet. But the knees and the hips have to stay in alignment because that activates that body girdle. Right then and there, you're going to do more than 500 sit-ups. If you just do that and nothing else, you're doing something. You might not be able to stay there all that long, but just to do that, you're going to feel. Now, if you put your hands in front of your knees like she's doing and you push your knee into your hand, you will feel the activation of that transverse ab. I'm going to show you another way to do it too. When we get to a little further, when I start showing you some things with stability balls, but 90-degree knee over hip. Now, this is what I see a lot of people do. And if you're very challenged or your back is really bad, yeah, go ahead, bring the knees a little closer. But as you get stronger, try to keep those knees at a 90-degree angle. You can note that her back already has an accentuated curve, meaning she's putting more pressure on her discs because she's not really engaging her transverse ab like she should. So what if you wanted to challenge yourself, but you don't want to kind of wimp out and do this one? I highly suggest you do it this way. You get a stability ball. Her knees are not exactly 90 degrees, but if you pull them in a little bit, I couldn't find a picture. So if you dig your heels into a stability ball, the ball has some give. So you're still using your abdominals, but yet you're not cheating by bringing your knees in or challenging your back, and you're going to activate that transverse ab. Now, when you do this, all you have to do is lift your head and shoulders, so to the shoulder blade, off the floor and breathe. You remember I said abs are breathing muscles. You don't have to sit up. Now, some people call this a half sit up. So you could call it that. It's just, honestly, it's trunk flexion. It's a small degree of trunk flexion, but you're using the breath. When you use the breath, you use the transverse ab. Now, you can also do this type of thing on a ball. This one is a no-no. Why is it a no-no? Because she's cheating. So if I just said to you, this is the position you want to be in, well, you can't really do that on a ball. But here's what's cool. Let me just show you the position of her shoulders is on the ground. The position of her shoulders, starting position, is off the ground, right? So she's no longer in a neutral spine. Here, she's already half curled up before she even begins. She's not really accessing her transverse ab. She's just allowing gravity to sit up. Also, she's got a slight little hip flexor bend, a little one, but it's still there, which means her hip flexors are going to help her do the exercise. Let me show you what it's supposed to look like. And don't be surprised if you have a ball and you try this, that you can't get up. So first of all, what's great about this? Two things. Notice how her hip is open. Her knees are at 90 degrees, but her hip, you can even roll back. I would prefer a little further than like the one on the right-hand side. Ooh, that looks beautiful. That is perfectly neutral spine on the ball. Trust me, you probably won't be able to curl too far when you do this if you do it right. She's opening the hip flexor, so there is no hip flexor involvement. This is very difficult to do. So that's the way to do it. If you have a ball, you don't have to put a ball in your hand because you probably won't even get up unless you're really strong. And then again, all you do is you're just breathing. You're not curling off the ball. Okay, so that's the difference in positioning that's going to make a huge amount of difference in your results. Now, how else do you activate the transverse ab? And I'm sorry, you just don't find normal looking people doing these exercises. So you have to pardon these extremely fit people. So another way, you remember when I said the transverse ab goes all the way around your body. So if you have a muscle that goes all the way around your body, what benefit would you have only working from the front? And if you're a reasonably sane person, you come to the same conclusion. It doesn't make sense, right? So again, to work the transverse ab in a super easy position, if you don't have a ball, and we're getting more than just that in here, but I'm going to focus on the transverse ab for a moment. So this exercise, the first one on the left, is super because she's got an elbow into the floor. Now, while it's closed chain, it's a little bit different than before, okay? Remember the baby rolling over? This is kind of akin to that, except she's putting an elbow into the floor. She's engaging some of the other muscles that connect with those obliques. And there's a couple of muscles back there doing that. But she's activating the transverse ab front, back, and side in this position. She's using the whole thing. And then she's lifting a leg, which is going to get into other muscles. And then this one is one of my favorites. This is a Pilates exercise. By lifting the top leg, you start to activate the transverse ab. You want to make sure that you lift the bottom leg to meet the top leg, and then they both come down slowly together. Now, if you try this, you are going to wobble a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know why? Your transverse ab is trying to make that happen, right? One of the things you absolutely have to understand in these positions is you want to think of your hips as headlights. If your hips had headlights on them, you always want your headlights shining forward, not to the floor and not up. So you may have to keep repositioning yourself to get this to happen adequately. But the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Now, as far as the exercise on the right-hand side, the girl with the red top, she's got an arm all the way down. So that's going to be a lot easier than being up in an elbow. So don't worry if you can't do the whole move. That is actually the more advanced move. If you're a little older, weaker in the upper body, or you're just beginning, the one on the right is perfectly fine as long as the headlights shine forward. Another thing you can do with a ball, and this is really interesting, if you have the big stability ball, mine's out in the living room. If you have a big stability ball and you've got another person, I can help you to feel your transverse ab in a super easy way. Hold the ball with your hands on either side and ask somebody to punch the ball up, side, bottom, wherever. You want a couple of punches into that ball, and all you're going to do is hold the ball. Your entire body, every muscle in your back and abdomen co-contract to create stability. So you can really see how this muscle works when you do those little things that I mentioned. It's really kind of fun to see it happen. Now, these will also activate the transverse ab. Planking position, which is the left-hand side, the guy, right? If you can't do a full plank, put your knees on the ground and bring your heels off the floor and drop your hips down and bring it up. You're activating and squeezing the transverse ab, and then you're exhaling and bringing it down. Now, why do you inhale when you lift up? Most of the time you see people when they're exercising, what they will do is on the most difficult part of the exercise, they will breathe out, which most of the time that's correct. But when you're working breathing muscles, think of inhaling. What happens? You inhale, everything expands, right? And when you exhale and contract, you're letting the air out. Everything contracts, pushes the air out. It's going to be the same when you're working with your transverse ab. It's always an inhale for your lift and typically an exhale for your lower. So you would lift, get in plank position, exhale, and drop down. Now, the one in the middle, what's happening with this is that you would drop the hip to the floor and then lift the hip off the floor. You're again working a few more muscles than just the transverse, but you're still working it. And then this alternate arm and leg lift works a bunch of different muscles. Super simple exercise. When you look at it, there's nothing tremendously difficult about the motion, but you're activating transverse, you're activating a bunch of different muscle groups, and you're including your glutes and hamstrings. And if there's anything tight in there, you're going to know. And you just keep working it. Now, these will also activate the transverse ab, and the one on the left will also activate the hamstrings. But this is a simple and easy way. Now note, this on the left-hand side, anybody can do that, even if you have disc issues. Even if you have disc issues, can you do this one? Because you are actually compressing your abdominals, and that's protecting your discs, okay? So these two are also something that you can use. Now, variety. So if you're not curling, but you're just breathing and crunching, you can make it a little bit harder by adding a weighted ball, a stability ball, or what I call tempo. So what's tempo? Normally you have a 1 second lift. I'm lifting, I'm lowering, I'm lifting, I'm lowering, right? Tempo is when you lift or lower to a different tempo. And here's an example. I'm going to lift to 3 and down for 1. Up 1 and 2 and 3. Now I'm breathing in 1. Or I'm going up, exhaling 1 and 2, and then 1 and 2. The tempo is up to you, but that change in tempo creates a momentary pause in between your repetitions that's really going to make things a lot more challenging for you. So here's another one that's simple and easy. She's starting in that 90-degree position. She's extending one leg. The other leg is still at 90 degrees. And then she's bringing in the other leg and she's switching. The beauty of something like this is that you just inhale when you extend one leg and exhale for the other. Or you can go inhale, inhale, exhale, exhale, whatever feels comfortable. Just make sure that you're breathing. What she's doing here is critical because she is lengthening the hip flexor while working the transverse ab. So this will help stretch out the low back tightness. And there are other things which I'm not covering today to get the low back to stretch out a little bit. When I get to back, I'll be covering that stuff in another one. So if you have disc problems, you will limit or eliminate would be the best idea. If you think you have, or you know you have a blown disc, do not twist whatsoever. Use all of these straight versions of things like this that do not involve twisting. You can even do something like this. This is going to get your upper body involved, your transverse ab, your glutes, your hamstrings, and balance. So there's really simple things you can do with a ball. The ball exchange is super simple. The videos I'm going to be sharing with you have some twists on the ball exchange that you can try. But typically you would start in a 90-degree position. See how she's got the first picture on the left shows her feet and her hands are at the furthest point away from themselves. That's more advanced. You don't want to start there. You want to start with your feet over your hips like the middle one or slightly closer. And then what you will do is you will bring your upper body and the ball back first. As you begin to drop your legs, note where your back feels like it's coming off the floor, and then you will exhale and bring it back up. Do not exceed where your back begins to lift off the floor, or you won't be doing yourself any favors. You will be challenging the stability of your spine, but you will get stronger. So you would just make sure you start easy. And when you're bringing your feet up, always bring one foot at a time, one knee into your chest, second knee into your chest, extend both legs up and place the ball. And don't put the ball in your feet and try to bring it up from there. So you want to really start safely. Otherwise, this is a completely safe exercise. So I'm going to show you another one that will work on a couple of different things, but absolutely your transverse ab. Here's your starting position. Your ending position is you're just going to pull your knees into your chest with your feet on the ball. The ball will roll in. You're working upper body, lower body, hamstrings, and definitely transverse ab. I think I already showed that. I'll need to get rid of that slide. And so this one would be something that would be okay if you don't have back problems. You will work your obliques in this one. So again, right knee, left knee, you bring them both in, and then you begin to, almost like windshield wipers, you begin to bring your feet slightly to one side, keep them together, and then exhale, pull up to center, inhale, drop them to the other side, exhale to center, and just like that, back and forth, but stopping in the middle to make sure everything is okay. And this would be okay if you do not have any back problems with discs. If you have a tight back, this is still okay to do. Just bend your knees at 90 degrees instead of a straight leg. A straight leg is a little more advanced. So bent knee is always a more beginner version. Straight leg, it's a longer lever, is always going to be advanced. You know, it's the furthest from the fulcrum, as they call it. So this is another one that you can feel comfortable to do. Again, I would be very careful with a bad back. It would be more like a step lift step. You wouldn't want to bring this knee all the way up. Here's another exercise you can do that you can slowly do with a bad back. Get in the position when you're just bringing a knee slightly to one side and bringing it back. So that's really a beginner type of thing, just to really start working on that transverse ab and strengthen the muscles that will help hold your discs in. Now, the exercise here, number 1, this is great for the obliques, but not if you have disc problems. Again, number 2 would be better, bringing one knee up to the side, but very, very, very slowly to the side. You wouldn't want to bring it all the way up and challenge yourself. Just go really slow if you have disc issues. And then number 3, number 3 would be a bit more advanced, where you're bringing both knees up. Now she's cheating a little bit, but it's not that bad. Her knees are slightly to the front, and you can definitely start that way because you're working both sets of obliques. I have a little version of that where I bring it from elbow to elbow, which is a little more difficult, but for right now, I really want to stick with basics. My favorite of all time, this is what you're striving for, some oblique V-ups, where you do straight leg V-ups. Again, no bad back for this, okay? You want to do this only if you know that you do not have disc problems. So these small 2-pound weighted balls are great too, because with most of the exercises I showed you in the beginning, where you're just bringing the knees 90 degrees, if you squeeze a 2-pound ball between your knees, you're also working on what's called the abdominal sling. It's the lowest part of your pelvis. And this really helps you to nail those exercises as you start to progress and get stronger. So literally you could, I'm going to go back to one of these. So if you're here and you squeeze the ball between your knees and all you do is press against the knees, that's going to challenge that transverse ab. So now, like I said, since I was wanting to be fairly quick about this portion of today is really complete. But what I'm giving you in your course section of Becoming Timeless are 2 videos I created several years ago, and I'm actually going to show you a bunch of different exercises. I'm going to give you modifications on how to make it easier or how to make it harder. So if you've got a bad back, I will tell you can do this or don't do this. And you can always ask your doctor or your physical therapist if this is okay for you. But I show you how to do them. And then in the second video, I put them all together like a class. Now, honestly, you only need to do these for a few minutes a day or every other day. And you're going to notice that you'll get mighty sore once you start being able to do a few repetitions of each one. The soreness is going to be in the front and in the back, and that's just because you're actually working your transverse ab. So I hope that this was helpful for you today, and this is going to be in your section of the Becoming Timeless in the A section. So go back and check that. By tomorrow afternoon, I will have the video posted, and I hope you have a great afternoon.